Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to spend a few minutes telling you about our work on the NET, the Neurological Emergencies Treatment Trials Network. Under Bill Barsan's leadership, working on clinical trials in the NET has been the focus of my research for the past 10 years, and it's been the most rewarding period of my career, at least so far. It's been rewarding for me for several reasons, but most of them trace back to working with Bill, so I'm particularly grateful to be able to speak at the research day that bears his name. Before I even start, though, let me digress a little bit, and always be wary of people that want to digress before they even start. But I want to start with why. And Simon Sinek in 2009 gave a TEDx talk to about 50 people at Puget Sound that has become the second or third most watched TED Talk of all time. And in it, he says that every organization in the world knows what they do, and many know how they do what they do, but that really only a very few understand and communicate why they do what they do. And when most people explain their organization, they start from the outside in this circle he calls the golden circle that goes why, what, how, and what. And they start from the outside in because it's easier. They go from the most concrete, what we do, to the more nebulous questions. And so it's easy, but it's boring, and it's uninspired, and it's no way to really change the world. So Simon tells us to start with why and then work our way out. And he gives a lot of great examples in his talk, ranging from Apple computers to Martin Luther King Jr. To the Wright brothers. But I won't tell you all of those, so take 15 minutes to watch his talk when you can. But I'm going to start with why and then tell you about how and what we do. So everything we do in the NET, we do to make people better. Every 28 seconds, someone in the US becomes a victim to one of the 8 most common devastating neurologic emergencies: ischemic stroke, intracranial hemorrhage, subarachnoid hemorrhage, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, status epilepticus, bacterial meningitis, and global brain injury from cardiac arrest. Okay. Every 2 minutes, a patient in the United States dies from one of these conditions, and these conditions alone are responsible for more than $115 billion per year in US healthcare spending, which is about 7% of our total spending. And there are reasons to think that we can help, that we can make a difference. The basic research over the last several decades has revealed tremendous insight into mechanisms of cellular brain injury that inform all of these conditions. But they've proven really hard to translate into clinically effective treatments in humans for a bunch of reasons. Among the most important of those reasons, though, is that we don't treat patients in our trials as early after injury as the laboratory work says that we need to. In the early 2000s, we were inspired by 2 lessons from NINDS's portfolio that told us what we thought we should do to make things better. There was a negative example and a positive example. And the negative example was NASIS, which was the National Acute Spinal Cord Injury Study, parts 1, 2, and 3. And that was a project conducted in continuous succession from 1979 through 1997. It looked at several agents, but is mostly known for evaluating high-dose methylprednisolone in spinal cord injury. Part 1 of the study enrolled patients up to 48 hours after their injury and was negative. Part 2 of the study was based on the fact that that was really too long a window of opportunity and enrolled patients only up to 12 hours after injury, and it was still negative. But there was a pre-planned secondary analysis that looked at the patients at several different time points and found that those treated within 8 hours had a significant benefit. So that led to part 3, which now enrolled patients up to, 12 hours, okay? And it was still negative. And they just gave a bigger dose. So after 18 years, what we really didn't know what to do for our patients, and the truth is we still don't know what to do for spinal cord injury patients with regard to these interventions. The positive example was the NINDS TPA study. In the early 1990s, there had already been several international trials of thrombolytics and ischemic stroke that had treated patients up to 6 hours after symptom onset, which was mostly treating people at 6 hours after treatment onset, symptom onset, which was about when the neurologists doing the studies first saw the patients on their inpatient units. John Marler, the then director of clinical trials at NINDS at that time, had the vision that the US trial needed to treat earlier, and he engineered the NIH trial to require integrating emergency physicians as co-investigators to be able to get things done in the ED. He famously pulled Bill Barsan aside at one of these early meetings and asked him, Bill, how quickly do you think we could treat a stroke patient with TPA anyway in a trial? To which Bill answered something like, I don't know, maybe 90 to 180 minutes, which became the basis for the TPA trial and then subsequent treatment of TPA and acute ischemic stroke. The trial was decisively positive and has markedly changed the practice of medicine and outcomes for many patients with strokes over the years. So NET was formed to help people by recreating the success of early treatments and to avoid the common folly represented by NASIS and a lot of other failed projects. So now the how. So NET was created to be a clinical trial infrastructure with the know-how and the boots on the ground to study interventions in the very initial minutes or hours after a neurologic emergency, in the ED or even in the ambulance. And what we built was a scalable hub-and-spoke network of enrollment sites around the country with NINDS funding. And we had several guiding principles that told us how we were going to do this work. And our guiding principles included a drive for early interventions and for patient-oriented outcomes that really mattered. We built a culture that was explicitly multidisciplinary to cross or break down artificial barriers, political barriers that neither the diseases nor the potential treatments really respected, like medical specialty, location in the hospital, or happening to be older or younger than 18 years of age. Our trials were designed to be able to enroll in the pre-hospital or the ED setting and then continue seamlessly in the ICU or elsewhere. We've also devoted ourselves to innovative and efficient trial designs, and these principles encompassed using technology and processes to integrate trials with clinical practice in the chaotic emergency setting. It also encompasses smarter, more adaptive trial methods that can provide more efficient and more complete answers to more questions for the same public research buck. Consistent with this, we've also been guided by a strong desire to study how the research enterprise works and how we can make it better. So we do this by conducting research on research during the course of our trials, and it involves learning about and finding ways to improve trial administration, protection of human subjects, the design of trials, and the regulatory environment. So what have we done? When funded, we were tasked with running at least 2 simultaneous clinical trials. We've now done or are still doing 7 trials in stroke, neurotrauma, and status epilepticus. And I'll briefly touch on each of these. So ALIAS was one of the first trials that we hit the ground running with. ALIAS studied the early use of concentrated albumin in patients with ischemic stroke and failed to show any neurologic protection compared to placebo. The trial was stopped after 841 subjects were enrolled, on schedule and on budget. Rampart was really our flagship study. It was the first trial designed specifically by and for the NET, and it was designed to compare the pre-hospital treatment of patients with status epilepticus by paramedics. It demonstrated that intramuscular midazolam was non-inferior and in fact superior at stopping seizures prior to hospital arrival and in avoiding hospital and ICU admission compared to intravenous lorazepam. The trial enrolled 1,023 adults and children ahead of schedule and under budget, something almost unheard of in NINDS's portfolio. PROTECT evaluated 72 hours of progesterone versus placebo in patients with moderate to severe TBI. It was found to be ineffective, but it enrolled 882 subjects with very, very strict clinical standardization that's really set the tone for future TBI trials. And again, it was done on time and on budget. ATAC compared 2 different treatment systolic blood pressure targets for early and intensive blood pressure lowering in hypertensive patients with acute ICH. More intensive blood pressure reduction, even in the first few hours, did not alter hematoma expansion or clinical outcomes or safety, leading to changes in the guidelines, and 1,000 subjects were enrolled before the trial was stopped. Our ongoing trials include POINT, a trial of secondary stroke prevention using very early ED initiation of double antiplatelet therapy versus aspirin alone in patients with TIA or minor stroke. SHINE, a trial of strict glucose control with IV insulin drip versus standard glucose control with sub-Q insulin in hyperglycemic acute ischemic stroke patients. And ESET, an adaptive comparative effectiveness trial of fosphenytoin versus valproate versus levetiracetam in the ED treatment of patients with status epilepticus refractory to benzodiazepines. So NET's really been effective because of its people, and really can't be understated. We've got 22 experienced and talented hub sites around the country where patients are enrolled in all of these trials. Each of these hubs usually has various spoke sites that they run and operate in a distributed way. We have this very excellent statistical and data management coordinating center at the Medical University of South Carolina, with whom we work very, very closely. And then here at U of M, Dr. Barsan runs the clinical coordinating center with about 16 amazing and talented staff that include our administrative director, education and human subjects protection coordinators, site managers, study monitors, and research and administrative support staff. And I appreciate working with this group every day. It's really been the source of our success. So what have we done by the numbers? In closing, we've completed 4 major phase 3 randomized controlled trials, 3 of which were published as lead articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, the other in Lancet Neurology, very high profile work. One of the trials was awarded the Society for Clinical Trials Clinical Trial of the Year Award for 2012, and then 3 of our trials are ongoing. In addition, we've developed and submitted 6 other trials, one of which was just funded, one was just resubmitted, one was approved by the FDA but is awaiting permission from NIH to submit. One's being revised, one was rejected, and one was withdrawn after we got scooped by a similar study shortly after submission, shortly before review. We've also had 8 other funded grants for ancillary studies of biomarkers, empirical ethics research, and planning of adaptive designs. 2 others are under review, 6 others were not funded. We've supported educational venues and training for junior faculty, peers in other networks, and for patient advocates. And what's in the future? So we recently found out that we're going to be funded to continue the mission of the NET for the next 5, maybe 10 years, with a broader scope and with some new NIH Institute collaborators. The new network, or continuation of the network, will continue to be funded by the NINDS, which will still be our home institution, but we're also picking up support and working for the NHLBI, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and also NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Science. They'll be co-funding the network going forward, and we'll be facilitating trials not only in neurologic emergencies, but also in cardiac arrest, pulmonary, and blood-related emergencies. The first trial in the next phase of the network was, as I said, recently funded and will be a learning phase study to compare doses of hyperbaric oxygen therapy in patients with severe TBI. We will receive the funds to get this started in the fall, and we've got other things submitted and waiting in the wings. We're really excited to be continuing and expanding this work to help more folks recover from what is typically the worst day of their lives. And when I think back about it and we look at what we've done, Will Moyer and one of his master's students, mentees, have recently published a study of the use of pre-hospital midazolam before and after Rampart, which shows an increase in the use of that therapy from 26% before the trial to 62% after the study. So in our small way, I feel that working together, we're really doing what we set out to do, which is improving the world for our patients. So thank you very much for your time.
Questions for Rob? I have a question, which I shouldn't ask probably if I don't know the answer to, but is, so what was the first thing you ever published? What was it about? Was it anything near what this was? Did you always want to be a stroke researcher?
Back when I was a student?
Well, as a student, or what was the first thing you...
My first research project was, I wanted to be an astronaut. And my first project was in the manned vehicle lab on a NASA grant to study vestibular development in weightlessness. And the idea was, you know, if you raise kittens in a room with all horizontal lines, they won't be able to see vertical lines. So what if you developed a creature in weightlessness? Would you have a functional vestibular system afterwards? And so I studied chicks on a rotating platform that happened to rotate at 33 1/3 rotations per minute. And we studied nystagmus in chicks, and that was the first paper that I wrote. And then we had a flight experiment on Challenger 51L that blew up.
Ooh,
So,
yeah.
so then I decided that was going to be hard to do.
that was a fork in the road, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, great. Other questions for Rob? I love the picture you have up of, I don't think a lot of people here know the vast team of net that exists out at Domino Farms and kind of that you have around the country as well. For folks that don't go out that way, sometime if you're at Domino Farms, you should walk around the floor and meet some of the folks that are out there. You guys have a huge team. So.
Well, and that gets to Lynn's point. I mean, it's clinical trials are so much of a team sport, and a good team makes it a pleasure and it makes the science successful, and a bad team is painful and leads to even worse, bad science and failed outcomes.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Rob.